Hello everyone, this is Shannon from That's So Po, and today I'm doing week 29 of my 2021 reads. This week I read so many really great reads. It was just a wonderful week. Timestamps and content warnings are in the description box below. First, I read The Office of Historical Corrections by Danielle Evans, which is a contemporary short story collection that is just amazing. I heard about this from Russell at Ink and Paper Blog, who I will link below, and this was one of his favorite books of last year, and I just really understand why. Also, Sush, my husband, read this last month and said it was so fantastic, so I needed to just bump it up on my priority list, and so I got to it finally, and it was so good. I will have a standalone review for this out later this week so you can hear more about it, but this short story collection is just so well written. It is tackling all of these experiences of Black women in the US, dealing with the way that their bodies are perceived, dealing with their interactions with society. It's a little bit dark. There's a lot of rough things going on for these women, and a lot of them make very, very poor choices, but it's got such heart and such humor in it, and it's just really a fantastic short story collection. If you like contemporary work, if you like short stories, if you like things that are feminist and that address issues of race and society, you should definitely pick this up. I really loved it. I gave it 5 out of 5 stars. Next, I finished The Impossible Resurrection of Grief by Octavia Cade. I had previously read The Stone Wētā by Octavia Cade and loved it so much, so I was really excited about this new novella. So this novella is sort of a near future where the world is even worse than it is now in terms of ecological disaster. So more animals are dying, Great Barrier Reef is dying, these sorts of things, but it's a very near future, except that there's something called the grief. And the grief is basically something that overtakes people as they recognize the degree to which humanity has destroyed the world around them. And this drives people to some kind of mental health crises where they really have no ability to maintain their connection to the world, and they're often driven to suicide. So this story is beautifully written. I love the way that Cade writes. It is slow and it is atmospheric, and I love the focus that she has on ecology. Also, her books tend to be a little bit thriller-esque, and I really like that in my SFF. This book actually verges a little bit on sort of the literary side, in that not everything in this is immediately understandable. The ending especially, I read multiple times and still don't quite know what it means, what happened, but I loved the experience of reading this. It was really, really immersive, really slow, really beautiful, and just examining grief and examining the effect that people have had on the world. It was definitely a beautiful read. I gave it 4 out of 5 stars. Speaking of beautiful reads, next I read I Know Why the Caged Bird Sings by Maya Angelou, which I buddy read with Madelyn at MadeWithBooks, who I will link below. This is Maya Angelou's memoir of her childhood, so from her young childhood through her teenage years, and it is beautifully written. This reads like a historical fiction. Even though it's a memoir, it really immerses you in the time period and in the place. So Maya Angelou grew up in the 30s in Stamps, Arkansas, some little town in Arkansas, and then later moved to San Francisco in the 1940s, right around when World War II broke out. And so this is her experiences of growing up in the Deep South and of, then moving to San Francisco. It is really beautifully written, just very much places you in those experiences, talks about the racism, talks about the Great Depression, talks about the war, talks about all of these historical things, and focuses so much on building up that feel of those places and times, as well as the characters, with slightly less focus on the specific this happened and then this happened. So it just is really beautiful to read. Big warning though, she does go through child sexual abuse, and so if you have that as something that you're not comfortable with reading, be aware that that's in there. This book I really, really loved. I gave it 5 out of 5 stars, and I have been meaning to read Maya Angelou forever, so now I really want to try some of her poetry. Next, I read a nonfiction book which was so impactful for me, which was Already Toast by Kate Washington. This is a book that I heard about from Kazen at Always Doing, who I will link below. Kazen always has excellent nonfiction recommendations. So this is a very interesting book because it is part memoir, part literary analysis, and part manifesto about caregiving in the US. So Washington is somebody who was forced into the role of caregiver when her husband developed a very rare type of leukemia that was incredibly difficult for him to get treatment for and led to him being disabled and her needing to give care kind of on an ongoing basis. So the memoir part of this is kind of going through that experience of her husband getting sick and her suddenly being put in this place of needing to give care to him, where that's not something that she'd ever really considered, and it's not something that she ever has felt a calling for. It also is really looking at the way that giving that care was so stressful and so draining for her, especially because that's not something that she wanted to do with her time, and the resentment and the anger that she felt over that. I really liked the honesty that she had there, although I will say it's uncomfortable at times because she and her husband are still together, he's still alive, but you find out a lot about her resentment over having to give care for these things and the resentment over the imbalances in terms of the roles in their marriage, and it's actually really fascinating. The literary analysis part is that Kate Washington is somebody who has a PhD in, I think, Victorian literature, and so she brings in a lot of connections from her experience to the experiences of characters in different novels, especially classic works, and just kind of talking about the role of women as caregivers. Big warning here, if you don't like spoilers, this book may not be for you, because she talks about the endings of, a dozen different books in relating their experiences to her own. The third part of this book is actually my absolute favorite, and that is the manifesto. So Washington, although she has a PhD in literature, has worked for a lot of magazines and newspapers and things like that, writing articles. And so a lot of what this book is doing is threading through sort of information reporting about caregiving in the US, talking about statistics, and with a real focus on two things. On one, the role of women in society and how caregiving is something that we expect women to do, and how really kind of sexist that is, and how pervasive that feeling is, and how a woman is so judged if she doesn't want to be a caregiver. The other part is really focusing on the devaluing of caregiving in the US and how the system is set up so that caregivers are not valued, they are not paid very well, and it is just really a tough situation. It's all about these systems of oppression of women, but also of minorities and immigrants and anybody who, isn't in power. So I loved that part of this, especially that analysis of caregiving in the US. So this book is something that really made me think about caregiving, made me think about the way that women's role is in that. Definitely, I'm reading other things right now and seeing it in everything that I read. Very influential. I wasn't such a huge fan of the literary analysis part. And again, there's some discomfort in terms of the anger that Washington feels towards her husband in this, but I think that part of that is just the socialization that we have to view women as caregivers. It's a little bit shocking sometimes to read about somebody who really does not want to be a caregiver. I also think that just as a little issue that is very much acknowledged in the book is that Washington is somebody who is very privileged. She is a white woman who was in a situation where she could handle a lot of what was happening in terms of they had great health insurance. Her husband was able to take off a ton of time from work because he was a professor. They had a lot of family support, and they financially were totally fine and able to hire help and all of these sorts of things. And so a lot of the arguments that she's making in this are talking about the system in the US that is very much devaluing caregivers, and there's a little bit of a contrast here between how that system works for everybody who's a little bit more marginalized, who is dealing with poverty or dealing with race or immigration or all of these other things. And so she's talking about all of that, but her experience is one of a lot of privilege. So sometimes, even though she acknowledges it really clearly, that just felt a little uncomfortable too. But I got a ton out of this book. I gave it 4 out of 5 stars, and it made me want to read so much more about the issue of caregiving. Speaking of which, the next book I picked up exactly because I was in the mood for more books talking about women dealing with caregiving and family illness. So I picked up Dancing at the Pity Party by Tyler Fetter, which is a graphic memoir of Fetter going through the experience of her mom developing cancer, getting very sick, and passing away, and just that whole process of grieving and how that has impacted her life. So I've had this on my radar for a while, but then Mercy at MercysBookishMusings, who I will link below, talked about this in a recent wrap-up, and I thought, yes, that's perfect. I'm very much in the mood to read that right now. And it was so good, you guys. I really loved this. So one, I love graphic memoirs, and Fetter's art style is very much mine. I love, it's both cute and sweet, but also powerful at the same time. And I loved the way that she talked about her experiences. I ended up crying through about 80% of this book. It was so moving. I do cry easily, but I don't usually cry throughout like the vast majority of a book, but I was so moved by this. It is about, you know, Fetter's emotions, about her connection with her mom, about the process of watching her mom fade through this illness that was just eating away at her, and about that kind of conflicting emotions she had of struggling to connect with her mom and of being impatient as a 20-year-old with what was going on, and then losing her mom, and just, oh, it was so moving. I obviously am like tearing up now. It was just such a great memoir, and if you want a memoir about grief, I think this is a really, really good one. I gave it 5 out of 5 stars. And the last book I read this week was also a graphic work, but this time a fantasy novel, The Girl from the Sea by Knox Ostertag. So this is a contemporary fantasy about a teenage girl who lives on a little island, and she makes friends with a selkie. And it's not just friendship, it's a little bit more than that. It's falling in love. But this is very difficult, one, because the person she falls in love with is a selkie, but more importantly, because the main character has not come out as gay to her family and her friends. And she's somebody who very much feels the pressures to conform and to be on the surface what everyone expects her to be. So this is a teenage love story. It's got some fantastical elements, also has some kind of ecological themes, things like that. A lot of themes too about how to be authentic and how to show who you are to your friends, and really a lot of issues of identity. So this was beautifully drawn. I love Knox Ostertag's drawings. I just love that style, the colors, the softness, the round lines, all of that was wonderful. I also really liked a lot of the themes in this. It is a little bit angsty for my taste. YA is often a little angsty for my taste. It just is very emotional, but I think that that also makes a ton of sense for what the story is. So I gave this 4 out of 5 stars, and I'm really definitely interested in picking up anything else that Ostertag writes. Okay, so that is everything that I read this week. If you guys have read any of these, if you have any thoughts, any recommendations, anything at all, just leave me a comment down below.